Buenas tardes. Bienvenidos al Instituto Cervantes de Nueva Delhi. So welcome to the Instituto Cervantes of New Delhi. Thanks very much for being here. Thanks all of you. It's really a great pleasure to continue with the program of Eulat. And I would like to say hello especially to Jorge Heine, who is here with us on the screen. And I think you can see the other speakers, right?
Yes, I can.
Jorge Heine, he's sitting in Boston, and we are really grateful for that he is also taking part in this activity. We also like to thank the ambassadors of Mexico, Ecuador, Uruguay, Chile, diplomats from Peru and other embassies. Thank you very much for being all here. Professor Ganguly, also being here, and many other Hispanists. And also I want to thank Global Youth for coming here for this session. As you know, this program it's intended for young people, and we are very happy to have you here today. Eulat, the way forward, Eulat for Culture, it's a program of the EUNIC Brussels with help from the European delegation. And it is really nice to have young people here. This is today already the fourth event that we are planning in the last month. If you remember, 1 month ago, we gave the start at the inauguration session here on 14th September. And after that, we had already 2 more sessions on 21st September in Casa Colombia. We had a youth commission with many young people from Europe, Latin America, and India participating. Then again on 29th September, we had the case competition at the Embassy of Chile. Thanks very much for organizing that. That was also a competition about different projects with young people also from the 3 continents, Europe, India, and Latin America. And today we're having this 4th event, which is a round table. I'm looking to it very much because we have people that really have been working in the field, both theoretically and as ambassadors, and we're looking forward to this session. I would like to tell you that this will be recorded. This will be posted at the YouTube channel of Instituto Cervantes New Delhi, and that beyond the people we are sitting here, we hope, that we'll have many viewers. As I have always said, the inspiration for this activity was Deepak Bhojwani's article, The Way Forward, which was written in 2018. And we would like to know very much, Deepak, today, the actuality of that, the relevance today, because 4 years have elapsed. Have been very, very special 4 years, what to say, with many. If what you say there in that article is still relevant to the present situation, I think that will be very, very important for us. As you know, we will appreciate also if a few recommendations are given in the sense that how India, Latin America, and let's not forget Europe. And we have here the ambassador from Spain, Jose Maria Ridao, because this is a European program which tries, to triangulate in a sense and see also what role Europe can play, or Spain or any other European country, in these relations between India and Latin America. So I won't take much more time. The structure of the event today will be, we have Nurin Khan as our moderator. I am very grateful to that. And the structure will be, we'll give 10 minutes to each speaker. Then we will open the floor for a debate between the speakers. And then we will open the floor to the audience, and looking forward very much to other ambassadors, what they have to say in whatever is being put forward here today. And without much further ado, I would like to introduce Nurin Khan. Nurin Khan, she's an Hispanist, and she did her doctorate on the narrative of Álvaro Mutis, and wrote her doctoral thesis on the work of Gabriel García Márquez at the Jawaharlal Nehru University. So she has she's deeply committed to Latin America, and she continues to work on Latin American literature, culture, politics, and current affairs. and that's why you are here with us, from the academia. She's been to Spain many times. She's been teaching Spanish for more than 20 years. She's been both a host, a guest in Spanish universities and also in Latin American universities. So with these words, Nurin, you have the floor. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your kind words, Oscar. It's been a pleasure learning Spanish and, of course, teaching it now to some of my students who are still here, and I hope to continue for some more time. Without further ado, I would like to invite you all, to welcome you all, actually, on behalf of the unique Delhi Cluster Project, The Way Forward. It gives me a great pleasure to welcome you all today in the roundtable discussion on Europe, Latin America, and India at Instituto Cervantes. Today's discussion is about examining the state of relations between India and Latin America to see how it can be taken forward to another level and how the European view is taken in consideration to these relations, where Europe, and specifically Spain, can play the part of a friend in need. So let me first introduce you our esteemed guest speakers for today. We'll be starting with Ambassador Deepak Bhojwani, who's a retired IFS, 1978 batch. He's been a former ambassador to Colombia, Venezuela, Cuba, as well as Consul General in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and has served the country as a diplomat in Indian embassies of Spain, Malaysia, Indonesia, Czech Republic, and speaks very good Spanish, French, and various other languages. He has been an asset to our country within India too, and continues to work in the political, social, educational, and economic sphere. He has written many articles highlighting the way forward. And as Oscar just mentioned, his article has been like the seed that has spawned this discussion that we're going to have today. Ambassador Bhojwani, I would like to welcome you to the podium. And also, I would like to start with my initial question. If you remember the paragraph that you have written in your article in 2018, I'm going to summarize it and not just read the paragraph. What do you think would be, when you talk about how that in spite of cordial relations, diplomatic relations, expertise in many areas, and considerably growing economy, we still have not made many inroads into this vast continent. So what is your view about it, Ambassador? Please. As you wish. If you would like to continue from there, we are fine with that.
Thank you, Nurin, for putting me on the spot. Oscar, you too, distinguished ambassadors of Latin America and representatives of different countries. Ambassador Jose Maria Ridao Dominguez of Spain in India. Professor and former Ambassador Jorge Hein, good friend of ours, who's coming in direct. Professor Ash Narayan Roy, my good friend, and of course, Nurin yourself, and friends from the global youth and others. It's impossible to talk about the way forward in Latin America in just 10 minutes. I'm going to give a try. The thing we have to do, first of all, when we think about Latin America, is find out if we comprehend Latin America. When I say we, I include myself, because after 12 years of serving there and more than a decade of research on that region, I still feel there's so much I need to know, and it's changing all the time. It's very dynamic. So the first thing we need to do is comprehend it. How do we comprehend it? We study its history, we study its geography, its immense resource base, its proclivities, its dynamics, its politics, and we find that you have this incredible mix, although it seems to an Indian to be almost monochromatic. Oh, they're Spaniards, actually, and they have a lot of fun, they have a lot of good wine and things like that, beaches and so on and so forth. Oh, I'd love to go to Machu Picchu and so on and so forth. So the thing is, and then of course there's this myth of distance. Now we need to comprehend why we know so little about Latin America and what it's all about. It's an incredibly dynamic mix of 21st century politics, 21st century economics, with all the challenges that 21st century economics poses, including frontier issues, such as climate change, including the whole resource crunch. How do you manage to graduate from a resource-based exporting economy to an industrial base and then further to a service-based? It is in transition to all these, Latin America. And when I talk of Latin America again, I speak of it as an agglomeration. We have to disaggregate. And I tell you this because particularly for our young friends who may be interested in getting to know more and making use of these opportunities that exist for you, you have to disaggregate Latin America, study its countries. You have behemoths, you have huge countries like Brazil, 2.5 times the size of India. Mexico, Argentina, 70 to 80% the size of India. Chile, which from top to toe is longer than Kanyakumari to Kashmir. I mean, you have incredible dimensions, incredible magnitudes. They have the largest producers of sugarcane, coffee, wine, you name it. There's a massive agri base, massive resources of fresh water, incredible resources of animal husbandry, and of course, frontier technology. Brazil is the world's largest exporter of ethanol, for instance. Every car in Brazil has at least 25% of ethanol. India is still struggling after 20 years of announcing it with 10%. So you have all these and more. So you comprehend what it's all about. It's not monochromatic. There may be, most of the countries in Latin America speak Spanish. Portuguese is spoken in Brazil, but that isn't the whole story. There's a huge racial mix. There's a huge racial history. There's an incredible social movement out there that has not torn apart, but has created contention between left and right, between dictatorships and democracies. And we have to understand why this has happened. Because India is a country that deals with all countries based on a sovereign understanding. We have diplomatic relations with all 33 countries of the continent. We have almost no adverse relations or adverse histories with any of these countries. They have shown us understanding, even at a time when we went ahead and had our nuclear tests in the late 90s, although from the 1970s, Latin America as a whole, the entire region, had signed the Treaty of Tlatelolco, which forbade not just the production and weaponization of nuclear weapons, but also the storage and the stationing of nuclear weapons, and this was accepted by the whole world, including India. So you have here a region that is very enlightened, and yet they're willing to compromise when it comes to a relationship, and that's what we have to look for. This is where we come to the second C, which is collaboration. How do we collaborate? Now, of course, we have embassies there, they have embassies here, they more than us, which is a matter of, again, consideration. Now, we have been trying, and Nurin, you asked the question, why aren't we going further forward, faster forward? I'd say that I'm not in diplomacy anymore, I haven't been for over 10 years, but I'd say that what we have here is an India today, in the 21st century at least, that is working very hard, it's running very fast, and it's getting ahead a little bit. I think India's profile in the 21st century has increased, I think everyone will admit that, but we still have a long way to go. And Latin America is beyond the horizon in more ways than one, and it's a tragedy, because this myth of distance doesn't apply to China, for instance. China's further away from Latin America than we are, and yet they have so much more connectivity. They've established it, aerial, shipping, etc. Well, we will someday, and if you see it as the crow flies, Sao Paulo and Mexico City are no further distant from India than New York and San Francisco. Nobody thinks twice about going to San Francisco or New York. They don't say it's too far away. So here, what we need is to deepen our collaboration, and we have the base. From 1990, when our bilateral trade was $500 million, we have managed to get to $45 billion. Sounds a lot, but it's not, because we managed to hit almost $50 billion way back in 2013. So what do we have here? We have here a solid economic base which forms the matrix of our trade. And this matrix, unfortunately, relies a little too much upon natural resources in Latin America, principally oil, minerals, now increasingly gold, natural resources such as agri-exports of soya, sugar, etc. at different points in time, and other commodities by and large. In return, India does export manufactures. We have a tremendous service industry, particularly in IT, which is present over there. We manufacture automobiles there, in fact, on the ground over there, pharmaceuticals, etc., etc. And further than that, our companies have gone in, and this is largely a 21st century phenomenon, where we have pharmaceutical companies, automobile companies, and others, IT companies, which have actually set up base over there, not just shop. They're not just offices which sell, make profits, and repatriate them. No, they're actually on the ground over there, and this is a matter of pride. And in return, you have companies, Latin American companies which are here, Brazilian companies which are collaborating or buying out Indian companies to make stuff out here. Mexico Cinepolis, which I think one day is going to be the largest film distribution and projection company in India. It has about 400 screens, if I'm not mistaken, and growing. So you do have a tremendous interest in return also, economically. This economic and commercial matrix is our foundation. And this is where we must collaborate even more. And how are we heading? We are slowly, unfortunately, a little too slowly, increasing our investments. I'm glad to see that just recently, the government of India, the cabinet took a decision to increase our investments in Brazilian oil fields and in Colombian oil even more. I hope the tariff agreements, the free trade agreements, what they're called free trade agreements, but they really amount to partial trade agreements, because we're not yet at that stage of free trade, and I hope we get there quicker than later. These agreements are also underway, and thanks to the diligence of the Chileans to start with, and some Mercosur members, we are moving faster. Peru hopefully will be on its way too. You have dynamic countries on the Pacific seaboard, which have formed the Pacific Alliance, which have given up on old protectionist tendencies. Hopefully India will see that and will move faster to negotiate further trade barriers, the lowering of trade barriers and non-tariff barriers with these countries, because there's an incredible amount of complementarity. You cannot imagine. Today, we've been getting for the last 20, 30 years apples from Chile. $20 million, if I remember right, in the year 2005. I was amazed. From Chile. And there are more fruits. I mean, they can send us much more if we allow them. Wine from Chile is all over our shops over here. Argentina is doing the same thing. There's the scope for Brazilian products. There's already stuff coming in from Mexico and so on and so forth. The sky is the limit. And in return, Mexico happens to have become the largest destination for the export of automobiles, four-wheelers from India. Mexico, Volkswagen exports to Mexico. It's the largest market in the world for Volkswagen. Similarly, we've got two-wheeler factories in Colombia. Hero has set up facilities and so on and so forth. So there's a recognition that Latin America is this enormous market of middle-income countries, middle-income populations, 600 million strong. And in Latin America, there's also the realization that this incredible 1.3 billion population of Indians is growing in wealth and in demand. So we've got to take advantage of this, collaborate even further. In political terms, I don't think there is much contention. We did have differences on the nuclear policy, even on the small arms policy in the UN, but by and large, we've been collaborating phenomenally well, as far as I can see, in multilateral forums. We have established strategic partnerships, of very, very important partnerships with Brazil, Argentina, Mexico, and we are heading to do the same with the others. It takes a little more diplomatic effort, and I think it's going to happen, because as I see the scenario today with the latest event of the foreign minister's bilateral visit for the first time, no excuses, not going through New York and then dropping in to Latin America. He went to Brazil, Argentina, and Chile. I'm sorry, Brazil, Argentina, and Mexico. Paraguay, I beg your pardon. Sorry, Mexico was earlier, beg your pardon. But that's four countries recently, right? Which is a good sign. And my feedback from the ministry was that these were all intended with a tremendous agenda. Now, what do? We consolidate. That's the third C. How do we consolidate? Well, Mexico, for one, is heading the CELAC. That's the Community of Latin American and Caribbean Countries. There's been a proposal to consolidate spatial collaboration in outer space. India has a lot of experience, is probably the cheapest in the world when it comes to space launches, launchers, satellites, etc. There's a tremendous amount of interest, obviously, in IT. There's a tremendous amount of interest in ethanol, in biofuels. There's a huge amount we can do together on climate change, the International Solar Alliance. Every country I know of in Latin America, bar a few, have joined up or are intending to. So we've got this incredible momentum waiting for us to take advantage and just flesh it out. What we need is, of course, more diplomatic activity. And I think here is a gap that needs to be filled, Nurin. I think this is what we need to do. We need to get much stronger. Unfortunately, and having been a practitioner of diplomacy, I have to admit that what tends to happen is the exigencies, the coyuntura, as they say in Spanish. Circumstances come in our way. So we'll open an extra consulate in Australia because the demands of the Indian community have to be recognized and met. Or we'll open another one in the US. We've already got 6. Why more? Because there's so much trade. So it's the cart before the horse? No. It's basically what comes first. How can we say what should come first? We create the demand. We don't have connectivity, so do we subsidize flights? Do we tell the airlines that we'll give them some help if they fly direct to Latin America? Do we rely on other airlines? What do we tell our shipping lines? There used to be direct shipping, but they couldn't find the tonnage. Will it increase? We don't know. So we are left to the mercies of the global economy and the exigencies and the priorities of the global. If shipping companies see enough traffic, sure. The time it takes from Latin America to India, give or take, is between 30 and 45 days for a sailing. In China, it's half. And the World Bank has pointed this out in a report in 2010, apart from the tariff barriers and non-tariff barriers we need to reduce, which I mentioned. So to consolidate this relationship, we need to deepen the economic collaboration. And I'm sorry to say that India has not taken the steps it should have. When Luis Alberto Moreno of Colombia, as the president of the Inter-American Development Bank, visited over 10 years ago, I was in Colombia, he asked our government to invest $50 million in membership of the IADB. For some reason, the Ministry of Finance couldn't find that $50 million. It's absurd. And here we are with Korea and other countries also actively participating in development projects and, in fact, deciding where to put the money. And here we are, India has left out. But we do have lots of Indian companies, whether it's in transmission, whether it's in infrastructure, whatever. And we have Adani Ports, which, for instance, the other day I read, is interested in construction in Costa Rica, in a port. It's expressed interest. Now here we are. But we need banking support. So if we don't do all this, we're not going to get there. There's so many C's. We have connectivity, we have commerce, we have everything that's waiting for us to take action. I may have sounded incoherent, but I think it's about time we get into action. I think the Ministry of External Affairs has realized it. We need the other government departments, particularly, and I think our diplomatic colleagues here will acknowledge this because they deal with the bureaucracy every day. We need our bureaucracy to take a colder and much more hard look at what Latin America has to offer. When I came back after retirement, part of the things I did was to help the Embassy of Colombia get approval to export quinoa to India. To my horror, I found in the Ministry of Agriculture, quinoa was a canalized item, which means it could only be imported among 18 others, including sorghum and others, by the State Trading Corporation of India. I was horrified. When I mentioned it to my colleague, the Secretary of Agriculture, he couldn't believe it. Of course, it got removed, and eventually, after a year or two, Peruvian and Colombian quinoa could be imported, duty-free. But these are baby steps. We need to go much further. We need not just to have commerce, we need to have our big boys, our big companies look at each other. There's so much of outsourcing that can be done from Latin America. It's called nearshoring. That's what TCS discovered 25 years ago in Latin America. There's so much we can do together on energy, whether it's solar, whether it's even oil and gas, or whichever source that you can think of. There's so much we can do together. And I could go on talking so much more, but I think I should yield the floor to my other colleagues. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Ambassador Vojvani. I'm sure, like me, many others will have a lot of questions later on during the discussion and when we open the floor for questions. Now, I would like to introduce Ambassador Jorge Heine. Yeah, you can hear me, sir? Hello. A very good evening.
I can. Thank you.
Yeah. Ambassador Jorge Heine is the former ambassador of Chile to India. He's been in our country for 3-4 years, I think so. And
4 years.
4 years, thank you. And he's also been an ambassador in China and South Africa, as well as state minister. He's a co-founder and member of the Diplomats Without Borders. He's been an ex-vice president of the International Association of Political Sciences, as well as a professor of global governance in the Wilfrid Laurier University. He has published 17 books, and currently he's a professor of international relations in the Pardee School of Global Studies in the University of Boston, from where he's been with us. Sir, I would like to ask you to start your intervention. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Khan. And let me thank the Instituto Cervantes for this kind opportunity and the invitation to share my thoughts with this very distinguished panel. It is really an honor to be at this panel with Ambassador Ridao, Ambassador Vojvani, Dr. Khan, and Dr. Roy. It brings back very fond memories of my days in Delhi, a little less than 20 years ago. I was in Delhi from 2003 to 2007, and those were heady days. The expression that I think came originally from the Economic Times was the global Indian takeover, which may have been a bit over the top, but it expressed an unbounded optimism, a can-do attitude, not just with Latin America, but with the world. The sky was the limit in terms of what could be done. President Lula visited India 3 times. Foreign Minister Celso Amorim seemed to be in Delhi every other month or so, developing IFSA, then BRICS, many initiatives that were put on the table. Those were very exciting times, and I look back at them with great fondness. We look at the situation today, and as Ambassador Vojvani has expressed, there have been ups and downs in the trade and in the FDI that has taken place between India and Latin America in these days. In some ways, trade and investment flows have not kept up with the expectations that we had in those days. And there are various reasons for it. But I must say, those of you who have heard me before know that I believe very strongly that this will be, in some ways, it already is, the century of Asia, which means essentially that it will be the century of China and of India. And that means that in Latin America, we have to step up our pace and put India much more front and center than we have until now. The opportunities are enormous. We all know the size and the significance of the Indian market and what the potential it offers. We look at the numbers, and to give you only an idea of the potential that is there, the total trade between India and Latin America is less than the trade between Chile and China. So that explains, how much we still have to go and the tremendous potential that is out there. And Ambassador Vojvani listed many of the areas in which we can work together. IT, of course, is a particularly significant and important part of this, at the cutting edge of economic growth. And Indian companies, IT companies are in Latin America, but much more still can be done. Now, what I would like to do, though, instead of elaborating further what Ambassador Vojvani has done in terms of the different economic areas in which these links can be further developed, I would like to step back a little bit and look at the bigger picture, look at the political relations that can be developed and that should be developed between India and and Latin America. And it seems to me that in that regard, it's important to keep in mind that we are living in perilous times. These are very difficult times in the international system. You may have heard President Biden speaking last Thursday about how close we are to Armageddon, comparing the present situation to the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, 60 years ago, which when President Kennedy was asked how close were we to nuclear war, he said between 1 and 3 and even, which is pretty close. And the fact that President Biden refers to this today gives you an indication of how difficult the current situation is. The Italian philosopher Antonio Gramsci had an expression. He used to define a crisis as a situation in which the old has died and the new has not yet been born. And I think that reflects very well what we see in today's international system, in which the liberal international order has essentially collapsed, has ceased to exist, the order that ruled the world for some 70 years. We're moving to a very different one that will be much more multipolar, but the system is not quite yet in place. There are no rules, and therefore chaos ensues. What should be done? What can we do in this very perilous situation? And I would, in that sense, like to illustrate what the Latin American reaction to this has been. Latin America finds itself with all the riches that have been mentioned. Latin America has about 1/4 of the world's freshwater reserves, enormous amount of mineral resources. Chile has about 1/3 of all the world copper reserves, oil, iron, many other things. The agricultural potential and reality of Latin America is enormous. It could feed the world. But we are going through very difficult moments. The pandemic hit the region very hard. And not only that, but we are also pressured, buffeted by this new tension, this new Cold War that has erupted between the United States and China. And we find ourselves being pressured from both sides in taking positions, in siding either with Washington or with Beijing, making life extremely difficult. There are very concrete projects in infrastructure, in connectivity, in telecommunications that have been abandoned, that have been jettisoned because of this. So we're paying a very concrete price for being caught in this new conflict that has emerged. Some people speak about a second Cold War. There's a whole debate on whether that is an appropriate name or not. But whether it is or not, the reality is that Latin America is going through a very difficult moment as it finds itself caught between these two great powers. Now, it is in that context that I would like to refer to a proposal that has come up, in which Latin America has taken a page from the best traditions of Indian foreign policy. And with two colleagues of mine, Carlos Fortin and Carlos Ominami, we have published a number of articles and most recently a book on something we call active non-alignment, a new doctrine for Latin America. And the book was published in Spanish last November, will come out in London next January with the title Latin American Foreign Policies in the New World Order, the Active Non-Alignment Option. And there what we do is take a page from what India did in the 1950s and 60s with the idea of non-alignment. Those were the days of the Cold War, in which the newly decolonized countries found themselves pressured to take a stance either with Moscow or or Washington. And what Mr. Nehru did was to say, we are not going to do either. We will take our own stance, we will take our own position. And that will be the way forward, not just for India, but also for the newly independent countries in the rest of Asia, in Africa, and in the Caribbean. And what we are saying, and it has found tremendous resonance throughout the region, the book that we published, the collective edited volume, has chapters by 5 former Latin American foreign ministers, including those of Brazil, Mexico, Peru, Chile, and Argentina. And what we are saying is that what we must do is put our own national interest front and center. Make choices not on the basis of what Washington or Beijing want, but on the basis of what is best for us. Now, this is not an easy task because it means you need a very special, both institutional and intellectual capability to make the right choices. The easy thing is to say, we will do whatever Washington says or whatever Beijing says. The difficult thing is to make on each and every issue the right decision on what is the way forward and what is the best choice for our country's interests. And we developed this notion, which means also a much higher degree of regional cooperation and coordination than we have had until now, which means a commitment to multilateralism, working together, which was very much one of the features of the non-aligned movement and the non-aligned doctrine. It also means a commitment to working together on issues of economic global governance, such a significant topic today, in which has been in such dire straits in the course of the past decade and a half or so. Now, in that context, what I find extremely interesting is that although our proposal was very much a future-oriented proposal, the reviewers of the book have said, well, it is not so much a future-oriented proposal, it is an empirical finding. They comment that already many countries in Latin America are acting that way. They are not automatically siding either with Beijing or with Washington. They are taking different positions depending on the issue at hand. Let me give you an example. In December of last year, on 10th December, something called the Summit of Democracies took place in Washington, D.C., in which many Latin American governments were represented. A week earlier, another high-level conference took place, the China-Latin America Ministerial Forum, in which, again, many of the same Latin American countries participate. This was at the level of foreign ministers. And they saw no contradiction between those two events. They participated in both, which is, of course, the way it should be, and is very much the way forward. Now, again, with the eruption of the war in Ukraine, we have seen how many countries in the global south have not sided automatically with either the position of Moscow or the position taken by Washington. They have taken their own studiously neutral stance. That, of course, has been very much the case of India, to the surprise of many. And India, interestingly, has chosen to use the term strategic autonomy to define its position, which, interestingly enough, is a term that really was developed in Europe a couple of years ago. President Emmanuel Macron in France has espoused it very strongly, and it has also been taken up in Spain by the Spanish government. Mr. Josep Borrell, the High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy of the European Union, has been a particular champion of the notion of a strategic autonomy. And we find there are significant parallels between our notion of active non-alignment and that of strategic autonomy. So the bottom line, what I would like to underscore, is that in Latin America, an important proposal that is right now on the table is that of active non-alignment. There is, as you might know, quite a political shift in Latin America today. In a short while, probably the 5 or 6 largest countries in the region will be ruled by coalitions of the left, which look much more sympathetically on regional cooperation and regional coordination in Latin America than normally conservative governments do. So we see a real opening for a different foreign policy stance, an opening that, it seems to us, can overlap with India's foreign policy stance and the possibility of enhancing these links, these ties, that have not had the dynamism that they should in the course of the past decade and a half, is very much there. So we believe very strongly that active non-alignment provides a common ground for Latin America and India to work together in these perilous times. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Jorge Hen. Now, I would like to give the floor to Ambassador Jose Maria Ridao Dominguez. He is the ambassador of Spain, as we all know. But he's more of a writer, like he just told me a couple of minutes ago, if I can say that, half an hour ago. But of course, he's a career diplomat and has been in Angola, Soviet Union, Guinea Equatorial, France, Consul General in Washington, D.C., Ambassador of Spain in the UNESCO, and of course now in India. He has been on and off a diplomat because I thought it was a very interesting CV biodata that I was reading, because he keeps going back to writing. He takes off being a diplomat, goes to writing, and then comes again being a diplomat. And of course, he has published numerous essays and novels, as well as been a collaborator on radio and in press. He writes for the newspapers. And there are so many things. There are other questions that I would like to ask you. But yes, he has a substantial amount of books, like Ambassador Hein also has. I feel a bit overwhelmed by the accomplishments by all of you. Ambassador Jose Ridao, por favor.
So thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you very much, Oscar, for having the possibility of exchange some views with my colleagues in this round table. Thank you to you all, to my fellow colleagues here, ambassadors in India. So I would like to say that every time we think about Latin America, Europe, and Spain, we think about Spain as being the bridge or something like this between India or other parts of the world and Latin America. Let me start by saying that it's not our feeling. We don't want to play this role, not because it's a bad role, but I think it's not a possible role. So I would like to quote a very well-known intellectual, a Nobel Prize, as Octavio Paz, the Mexican Octavio Paz, ambassador to India also, that used to say that Latin America is an eccentric Western or European area of the world. So it's very important to think in this idea of eccentric area of the world, or an eccentric European area, used to say Octavio Paz. Because in fact, at the end, after 20, 25 years, 30 years of this sentence, we can speak about a circle without a center. So it's not eccentric Latin America comparing to Europe. It's also eccentric Spain compared to Latin America. So we don't have a center. This is very important. And I relate this idea with Deepak has told here about the diversity of Latin America. So we have to think in a circle, in an area, without a very clear center. And this is important if we think about the possibilities of collaborating Latin America, Spain, and India. Because we have to make a very clear difference between culture, tradition, or whatever, and politics. It's very important to do in the good sense, in the right idea of the value of culture and politics. So if we think about culture and we think about our role of being acting ambassadors to India, it's important to know and to be clear about the idea that if we promote Octavio Paz, Álvaro Mutis, García Márquez, or Juan Goytisolo, Spanish writers or writers in Spanish language, we're promoting our countries. We are promoting our culture. We are promoting this culture without a center. And it's very important to think about this culture without a center because at the end, it's a rich culture. And it's important for us as an ambassadors here to India to transmit to our Indian colleagues this idea. Because at the end, the culture in Spanish language, or the Spanish culture, will be stronger if we act in this way. We will be more present here in India, and we can start thinking about politics, about what to do in politics. So it's very important what Ambassador Heine told, which is the collapse of the international system. So I agree with him. The only thing I resist myself to accept that the system has collapsed. So there is a huge risk of collapsing. It's a very difficult moment, but it's the only thing we have. So if we take into account this idea of an area without a center, we can see that the most important thing will be rules. We have to defend rules, even if the system is collapsing, even if the system is at very high risk. We have to try to prevent it to collapse, and we have all the policies in order to try to do things in parallel to this multilateral system. So speaking about politics, the thing we can do, because Oscar asked us what to do, what to do in the coming time, we have to start with regional alliances. I think the answer to the risk of multilateral system, to international system, is to be stronger in Mercosur, is to be stronger in the European Union, is to try to put ahead rules. And it's very important for us as cultural Spanish or Spanish cultural area, in the sense that since we don't have a center, we have to put ahead the rules. Rules in our areas, in Latin America and in Europe. We have also a second way of having or to preparing the world of the future, not to be the world we are forecasting right now, is that Spain, I insist, is not the bridge to Latin America. We are in an equal foot. We are very happy. Yesterday was 12th October. 530 years ago, Columbus reached America, or to be more precise, Las Indias. And I think it's not the moment to think about the past. Because the past, I think also here in the Instituto Cervantes, we had the possibility of speaking about this. Every time we tell to young people about the common past, we are trying to conceal in some sort the tragedy behind this expression, common past. So even if I repeat myself, because I think it's necessary, the reflection of the 12th October is not a reflection about how a nation, Spain, went to a continent, America, because in reality it wasn't like this. It was Castile and a power, a very concrete power in Castile, going to a new area called Las Indias. It's not to take off responsibility of Spain, if you can tell in this way, is to try to be precise in order to have the concrete and real debate.
So the debate is not among nations. The debate is among power and how to use power. Because this Castilian power killed Indians in America, but kills also Spaniards in Spain, Muslim, Jews, and others, all the dissenters. So the problem is not a nation, which is something very, very strange in this moment. It's not the meaning of nation was not the same as today. The problem is power, how to use power. And if you use power in this sense, this idea, the power related to a religion that says that your God is the real God, the only God on earth. So you have, as Castilian king in this moment, you have not only the right to go to Las Indias to give them this God. It's not only the right, you have also the obligation. And we have the same process in the 19th century with science. It's not a God, is the principle, the most important principle in this moment in 19th century. So Europeans thought that they have the right to give this principle to Africans, and at the same time they were obliged to this mission civilisatrice. They were obliged. It's a paradox, but it's like this. And if you permit me, coming to a closer time, in Iraq we had the same thing. We had the good idea, democracy, one understanding of democracy. So some countries thought in this moment that they have not only the right, also the obligation to give Iraqis the God of this moment, democracy in the sense they use this word. So it's important to have all these ideas close to us in order to continue thinking on how to go forward. So the international system is collapsing. I agree with Ambassador Heine that it's collapsing. I resist. It's not a question of disagreement. It's a question of will. I think we have to resist this idea of collapse. And the way to resist this idea of collapse is to try to reinforce our regional systems in Latin America and also in Europe. The second thing is, what's the role of Spain in this small country compared to India, small country compared to Latin America? But Latin America has also small countries, so it's diverse, and we have to put together rules. Is the most important thing for us. So if we think a direct relation between India and Latin America, and we as Spaniards were very happy to be to attend to a strengthening of these relations, we think that you will miss something, which is the European dimension. If you count on us, and we count on you, we will have this other dimension, the European dimension, strengthening always the rules. Because European Union has the possibility of the instruments and the tools to strengthen these relations with Latin America, with India. At the same time, Latin America has the same tools and India as well. So I think it's good for everyone to count on us, but I insist on equal foot, thinking about rules. To be more concrete about this idea, we are very interested, I mean our government, my government is very interested in seeing India belonging to Ibero-American summits, Latin American summits. So there is a role as observers. I understand quite well that this organization is not as strong as European Union or Mercosur or others, but if we have to defend rules, if we have to defend the system, the multilateral system, I think it's a good start. And I think the role of India in Latin America through this organization, which is not as strong as others, but it's an organization, an existing organization, will be very good, because India, because of this idea of non-alignment and strategic autonomy, could play an important role to have something which is very important in Latin America and in Europe and the rest of the world, which is one idea, only one idea, to express an idea, to express a sense behind the data. In order to illustrate this approach, I would like to think about Prime Minister recently killed Abe, the Japanese Prime Minister. So we had, before him, we had all the data of this region, commerce, connectivity, whatever. We had all. But finally, Prime Minister Abe found the idea. The idea was Indo-Pacific. So we need something like this, and we have to continue debating in our regions, strengthening our rules, our sectorial multilateral system in order to prevent the general system to definitively collapse. So I think this is a good approach to be part of these Ibero-American summits for India and to try to play this role, even if it's a modest approach, is one approach in this very difficult world. And we have finally another element, another multilateral system, which is United Nations, UN. I am very happy to see that India, in its will to reform UN, is doing something which is a very good, a very realistic approach. They are not thinking of finishing with UN. They are thinking about reforming UN. So is the difference between starting from zero, which is very difficult, and at the end, starting from zero means difficult times, or thinking about even the ruins of the system and try to do something with the ruins of the system. And I think this approach of India is very interesting. And in this approach to UN, I think Latin America, the European dimension of Spain and Latin America dimension of Spain, the position of India have a great role to play. And I think we can play this role. And to finalize, I would like to refer also to the Ukrainian war. So Spain is not indifferent. Sometimes outside Europe, you can think that Europe is completely behind US or behind other parties. I think it's important to understand what happened there. We have been told many times in India and other countries as Europeans that it's an European war. I'm sorry, it's not an European war. It's a war in Europe. A war in Europe. I understand that there were many wars in other areas in Africa. I've served in Africa and was very conscious and very, very engaged in trying to convey to my government the importance of these conflicts. So perhaps, and it's true, we don't pay enough attention to these conflicts. Also in Asia. So the difference is that in these times, the effects of this war in Europe are global effects, and we have to answer to them, even if we don't agree with one part or another, or we have a stand different for the other countries. So we have to face together the global effects of this war in Europe, this very sad and terrible war in Europe. So Spain, I insist, is not indifferent to this war and to this thing. And I come back to my first sentences. Sorry, it's not me. So it's not my opinion. The opinion is this one. So I would like to come back to the first idea, is the importance of rules. Spain is not indifferent, not because we are taking a stand with Washington against others. We are taking a stand because we are strongly committed to international law, to sovereignty, to integrity of countries. And I think we all can meet to each other in this position. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. Now I would like to call to the dais our last speaker, but not the least, Dr. Ash Narayan Roy. He is currently the director of Institute of Social Sciences in Delhi, and he's from two of my alma mater, actually, Jawaharlal Nehru University and Colegio de Mexico. He has been a member of fact-finding missions of the United Nations on the question of Palestine. He has also been an observer of the Sri Lankan parliamentary elections in 2015. And he has been another beacon in the India and Latin American relations, publishing several books, dozens of papers in national and international journals on Latin American affairs, democracy, local governments, globalization, and foreign policy. So Dr. Roy, please, you have the floor.
His Excellency, Senor Jose Maria Ridao, Ambassador Deepak Bhojwani, Ambassador Jorge Hain, Dr. Nurin Khan, Excellencies, members of the Diplomatic Corps, distinguished invitees and friends. The theme is very vast, but also very challenging. And when you are the last speaker, you have two sets of problems. One is what to say when all that you wanted to say has already been said. The other is how to say all that which have already been said differently. I have decided to go by the advice of 17th century Spanish philosopher Baltasar Gracian. He says, what is good, if kept brief, is doubly good. But let me begin with a caveat. Academics and think tankers don't solve public problems. They merely shed light on them. If an academic prescribes a remedy, he or she can be described, okay, he's a scientist. But if the suggestions are unpalatable, then you could always say, well, he is an academic after all. I don't pretend to be an intellectual because I believe that intellectual is someone who looks at the sausage but thinks of Picasso. Whereas I just say, pass the mustard, please. If you're asking too many questions, you are likely to be met with furrowed brows and scrunched mouths. But I will take this risk because I believe asking questions are sometimes more important than providing answers. The theme requires questions. India and Latin America, as we know, have a lot of common. But you see, both the countries decided not to wander lonely as a cloud, but to become real wanderers among the world. Latin American culture, as we know, has three kind of, important roots: Africa, America, North America rather, and Europe. But the best part is that Latin America refused to be a victim. Now, something similar happened in the case of India. India did not blame others from all its miseries and the caste system and whatnot. It believed that they were the problems of traditional practices and all that. Tagore insisted that Indians should glory in the illumination of lamps lit everywhere in the world. Now, let me say a little bit about the three-way forward triangularity that we have been talking about. Paz makes a seminal point about his bond with Spanish language and literature. He says, our literature did not passively accept the changing fortunes of a transplanted language. It participated actively and even changed it. So the interaction between Spain, or rather Europe, and Latin America led to what could be called shared luminosity. India's experience was similar. Gandhi's India knew that there are only two ways to win: defeat the other side or infect it with your ideas. It chose this latter. During a visit to Indonesia in 1927, Tagore said famously, it is very relevant. He said, I see India everywhere, I find India nowhere. This is very true till date when it comes to Latin America. Well, if I say that, it is a likelihood that I will be drowned in the statistics saying how much we have done. Yes, we have done it. But then, statistics have their own limitations. If you put 10 homeless people in the company of Bill Gates, the average income will be $10 billion. I would rather believe in what Aristotle said. The whole is greater than the sum total of parts. And this is exactly how India's interaction with Latin America has to be seen. Things have, of course, begun to change, and we are very happy. But has India missed the boat in Latin America? Or has India spread too thin? After the return from his historic visit to South America, External Affairs Minister Dr. Jaishankar spoke at IIM, Ahmedabad, on India's foreign policy, a transformational decade. He made two significant statements on Latin America, but also a remarkable admission. He said that Latin America can be a hub, business hub for India. Of course, he did not elaborate. He also agreed that trade leads to relations with Latin America. So, well, we are happy that it is the flag that follows the trade. So we must compliment all those who have worked on promoting trade and all that effort they have done it. In reply to a question by a student there, Dr. Jaishankar admitted that India had missed out on Latin America. Now, what India needs to do? China is a declining power. I'm daring to say this relatively. You see all that what is happening and all that. Now, this gives you some space. You could take advantage of that. Or you could compete, in a more systematic, scientific way with them. For India, Latin America can't be a ship in the harbor. You see, the ship in the harbor is safe, but ship is not meant for that. As they say, if you have long legs, you play long jump and not play chess. India will have to do this. There is no meaningful cooperation with Latin America in the field of defense production, research and development. Joint military exercises are very rare. But what I believe India needs is a big redesign. So it's a big redesign problem that India has to confront. The active foreign policy needs not just imagination, but constant confirmation. That confirmation comes with more engaged discussion, which we are happy it has happened, but is it enough? What India lacks? Latin America is too complex to be captured by one narrative, whether it is kind of, you could say trade agreement or alliance formation or voting pattern at the UN. India needs new paradigms, tools and strategies for Latin America. India's global rise and Latin America's growing assertiveness require a new cooperation paradigm. There can be three-pronged cooperation: horizontal, special relations with strategic partners in the proper, and you can also have the typical inter-regional cooperation. This is with some countries, India can have cooperation a la carte, maybe privileged dialogue, but with others, the other formats. And this is so one size fits all, no. Latin America is hugely diverse continent. I use the word continent consciously. Let me use the musical terminology. It is not just salsa, ranchera, mariachi, cumbia, or son. It is also Latino punk. You should remember that. Change from one kind of policy to another can happen rapidly, but both India and Latin America will need to follow a trajectory of what business people talk about, the S curve. The S curve is slow at first, then very fast, before slowing down to a plateau of general use. It's like from typewriters to computers, from Kodak to digital. If you don't speed up, there is a chance of windows getting closed. Now, towards the end, let me say what India needs to do one thing and what it must not do. I strongly believe that the Anna Karenina principle will be extremely useful to promote and strengthen ties. That is, success is not about doing one thing correctly, but about avoiding many possible mistakes. But what we need to avoid is the peacock dance approach. One step forward, two steps backward, and a spread of feathers. India's thunder is good. Its thunder is impressive. But as Mark Twain said, it is the lightning that does the work. Time for Prime Minister Modi to undertake a lightning visit the way it happened in 1968 by Indira Gandhi. Because China is already doing that. India must know that it is not enough to say, te quiero, I love you. When will India say, tú eres mi amor, you are my love? We must dream big. As Octavio Paz said, merece lo que sueñas. You deserve what you dream. Thank you very much.
Is this working? Yeah, ahora sí. Yeah? Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Roy, also for your comments. And thanks to all the speakers, Ambassador Rida, Ambassador Bhojwani, Dr. Roy, Ambassador Hen. It's been a real pleasure, and there have been so many ideas coming into my mind after, listening to you all. There's one thing that I actually think has really caught my attention is that how we cannot treat Latin America as one whole entity. Maybe that's a problem. That's how when we, we cannot see that all Latinos are the same. So all Latin Americans will have the same style of working, the same style of, doing business. So we have to see, I personally believe that our country needs to actually address each country specifically, or maybe if not a country, then a particular region, a cluster of countries like South America, the down south, Paraguay, Chile, Argentina, Uruguay, they have a certain different style of working and taking things further. And the same way the Central American countries or Colombia, Venezuela can be clubbed. So that is something which we can actually think of when we talk about India-Latin American relations. But that is where Europe also comes in, Ambassador, because Spanish is the link that we as Indians will have in all the Latin American countries. Fortunately for us, we do not have to learn different languages in this region, So for Indians, it's an advantage. We learn Spanish and we can interact with any of the Latin American countries and do business with. So we have to take into account the contribution of Spanish language into making it easier, facilitating us Indians as a whole. And of course, when I, being a language and literature teacher who's also delved a bit into, doing research on not international relations not being my subject, but I've actually been guiding MPhil thesis on that. So that is one point which I think is very pertinent for us. And there are other questions that I would like to keep asking all of you. And I'm sure we have time for that. And then we also have time for question-answer sessions with the audience, whoever would like to speak. But if I can ask, as in my capacity of a Spanish language teacher, if I can ask a question to all of you, the Latin Americans, what would you need also? We always say what we need from Latin America. But I would like to ask, what would you need for us Indians to do to have more, better relations with you? And we have to see beyond Mexico, Brazil, Colombia. We have to see, because I'm sure the diplomats there the Indian diplomats have done a wonderful job. They have taken trade further. It has been increasing all these years. But what more can we do? So that would be my question, open to all Latin Americans and Spanish ambassadors also, of course. So I would like to start with the question which I had already asked Ambassador Bhojwani earlier about how, that in his article. But now I would like to just ask you, you said that, we have this, we need to take advantage of commercial relations to build cultural relations. Do you think it is possible,
Thank you, Nurin. Yes, definitely. Without going too elaborately into the issue, I think the one thing that we can all bank on, Indians, speaking as an Indian, is the incredibly positive image and even identity that India possesses in Latin America. In all my years there, I found such an incredibly warm and genuine reception. Apart, of course, from the fascination for Indian mythology, and in fact spirituality. You have centers of Sai Baba, you have yoga. There was more yoga in Sao Paulo when I reached there than in my hometown of Bombay, for instance. You also have a tremendous receptivity among the media. You have Bollywood, which is so famous that even without commercial distribution in that region, you have women and men and children who are fascinated by our movies. And there's a tremendous potential out there. Of course, there is a bit of a language hindrance because Latin Americans don't take to English as easily, in fact, as some Indians take to Spanish. So the effort is more on our part. And if you do speak Spanish, then Latin America opens up to you absolutely instantly. It's incredible. And in terms of our cultural penetration, we haven't done as well, of course, as the Chinese. We have 5 or 6 cultural centers in the region, and a lot of them, regrettably, are centered around where the Indian expatriate community or the diaspora is. We need to do more in that regard. We have a tremendous amount of effort that's been made by individuals, some of you who are here, in translating Latin American works into Indian languages and in English. And we have the converse also, a lot of Indian works which have been translated. The Bhagavad Gita of India was translated 150 years ago in Argentina into Spanish, the first translation, and so on and so forth. So yes, there's a tremendous amount we can do, and in fact, we should utilize our private sector and even the public sector to patronize cultural relations. And I think here the EU would serve as a very good example. I mean, look at the Cervantes Institute. A lot of people who want to go to Latin America are coming here and learning Spanish. So it's an impressive kind of linkage that we can have, culturally for sure.
Yeah, thank you, Ambassador Bhojwani. Yeah, actually, I would like to just say that the floor is open to all of you. I'm not the only one who's going to keep asking questions. Ambassador Hein, if you have a question or any comment, observation after what you have heard all these speakers say, and in the audience also, I think it can be an interactive session. I already posed a question to the Latin Americans and Spaniards, so feel free to ask or intervene. Yeah.
Sure, of course. Thank you. Thank you again for the opportunity. Let me say the following. You know, if we become sort of task-oriented, and you ask me, what can India do that would sort of single-handedly provide an impetus to this relationship that has so much potential, but has not developed in the past few years with the dynamism it could? I would say high-level visits. I always say state visits are a bit like an execution. They concentrate the mind. If things go wrong, we know whose head is on the chopping block. But if they turn out well, many good things can come out of them. That was my own experience. I happened to host the first presidential visit from Chile to India, believe it or not, in 2005. Before that, no Chilean president had visited India, and it made a tremendous difference. PTA, preferential trade agreement, was signed shortly thereafter. Trade increased considerably. Things really went well. So I would say, if we manage to get that going, it is obviously, a reciprocal thing. All sorts of good things would happen. So that would be my suggestion.
Yeah, thank you so much. In fact, yes, Ambassador of Ecuador, please, you have the floor.
Yes. I'm Teodoro Maldonado, Ambassador of Ecuador. I agree with everything that's been said tonight here. Find some concepts very interesting. I think what needs to be done in order to promote more of India in Latin America and the reverse, more of Latin America in India, is, yes, I agree, more dialogue, more presence, high-level visits would be very, very, would send a very powerful message. I mentioned in some other gathering, maybe establish a periodic, permanent dialogue between India and the region. That would also concentrate a lot of attention in the relationship between India and Latin America. And in particular, coming to Ecuador, I think it would be a good idea to open an Indian embassy in Quito. I think it's about time to. It's been many other embassies have been recently been opened in the region, and I think the time has come to open an embassy, an Indian embassy in Quito. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Yes, please.
Let me just to make it short.
Ambassador of Uruguay. Yes,
I'm the ambassador, Alberto Guani, the ambassador of Uruguay. Just to continue with what my colleague from Ecuador was saying, unfortunately, the visit of Minister Jaishankar was to Mercosur except Uruguay this time. There is no embassy of India in Uruguay. Although, like Mr. Roy said, I totally subscribe the fact that India needs to redesign its presence in Latin America. It needs to cover much more countries. I have been saying about the fact that it does not have an embassy in Uruguay is a big factor that right now is a presidency of the Mercosur. And we have Tata Consulting Services that has been celebrating this year 20 years in Latin America. It was the first Latin American country in which it established. And at the same time, we are celebrating next year 75 years of diplomatic relationships between India and Uruguay. I think that it's a long tradition. I think it's a long time. In 1968, Indira Gandhi went to Uruguay. There has been no presence of any high dignitary of India in Uruguay. And I think that, of course, the political linkage that could exist in that sense is very important. We need to tell our Indian friends that you need to make an effort to be more present in the region. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. I think that should have been my last question when we talk about the way forward, but I'll come back to that also. Ambassador Ridao, I would just like to, you talked about how do you see Europe, specifically Spain, playing a role in the India-Latin American relations? Like we were talking earlier, but how do you actually see what role can Spain play in the current times?
Thank you. Thank you very much. So, summarizing a little bit the intervention, I think what we need from India, first of all, presence in Latin America. So it's important. There is another idea, which is this idea of active non-alignment. As European and having the problem of the Ukraine war, we appreciate a lot non-alignment or the new version of non-alignment in the Indian foreign policy. But we wait for the active part of this policy. So I think India has now a strong respect in the world, and we are waiting for the initiative coming from this respect. So this idea of active non-alignment, we need as Europeans this activity in Latin America is present. Another idea is that I feel sometimes, and I'm very frank, very candid of speaking about this, that sometimes in Europe and perhaps in other parts of the world, we think of India, of an India of 20 years ago. And we want to negotiate with an India of 20 years forward. We need to negotiate with the present India. India is a huge promise of a great power, but for the time being, is a great country. And we have to negotiate with them as a great country. And like this, extending their presence in Latin America, being perhaps if they agree, and I understand quite well, and I respect completely the position of India being more active, we will have the possibility of negotiating with the India of nowadays, not with the future India or with the India of the past. Speaking about this approach to the relations, so the role of Spain is to put the European accent in this circle without a center. It's the European accent. Why this European accent? Because Europe has tools to strengthen relations with Latin America, and if we think about Latin America and India, we have to create new tools, as we created the tools to Latin America and Latin America to us. So it's important to have and to think of Spain as part of this world without center, and having the possibility of promoting inside the European Union a more extend or more a greater area of the world of people thinking in the same terms with the same concepts and being keen to have a stronger trade and all the relations. So in this sense, I think that we as a Spanish embassy here, or Spain as a country in India, and thinking about Latin America, we have some concrete initiatives that we have to work on. For instance, connectivity. So Latin America is very far from here. Spain also is far, but it's in the middle. So even if you think in the other way around, it's very far India, but you have the possibility of having a friend country just in the middle of the strip. So we have to work on connectivity. It's important for trade, it's important for culture, it's important also to have this new concept as Indo-Pacific changed everything, and this part of the world became a very important and the more decisive area of the world of nowadays. So we have to think about a concept, and I think this connectivity, this being in the middle, this putting the European accent to this relation is important for all of us. I'm thinking of India and insist the India of today. It's not the India of 20 years, it's not the India of 20 years ago.
Yeah. No, actually, I totally agree with Ambassador Rida because that idea of Indo-Ibero-American, that sounds actually perfect, you know, like even as a multilateral organization. And yes, Spain can be the stepping, like, you know, like for me, it was so easy to go to Santiago de Chile when I went from Delhi to Madrid and Madrid to Santiago. So this is something which can, like, you know, facilitate not just people like me visiting Latin America, but other commercial people or academicians or anything. So that was a very good effort. I was quite sad to know that Air India has stopped these flights. So I think we maybe for later on when we talk about the way forward, when we jot down kind of a white paper of what are the suggestions that we can get out of this conference, we can we can suggest that also. Ambassador Pochwani, like, would you like to say something?
Hello. In fact, I wanted to take you up, Jose Maria, on what you said earlier, and in this context about the Ibero-American Summit. I was reading something about EU statement, and this is very interesting because there was an EU paper which was published, or well, not published, but it was quoted, where the EU foreign policy establishment expresses apprehension about the ingress of China, Russia, and other powers into the region. And this is nothing new. The Americans are upset about it. India, to some extent, also has been observing how strong China is getting. And of course, it's a fair play. I mean, everybody can do what they want. And of course, Latin America welcomes China commercially, economically, and so on and so forth. Now here, given this perspective of the EU and the EU preoccupation with its lack of, in fact, I have the paper in my pocket, but I don't want to just quote it. There is a certain apprehension that the EU has not paid enough attention or is losing ground in Latin America. So in this context, what you said about the Ibero-American Summit, which has been held very regularly, unlike the EU Latin America Summit, which is going to take place, I believe, this year or the next, after 6 years. So I think the EU is now being a little more active in Latin America as EU, but the Ibero-American Summit has been, I have been seeing it, and it's been fascinating because it does serve as a very relevant, if I may say, forum, because there is a certain cultural or historical affinity, and I dare say even an economic affinity, because you have banks, Telefonica, other empresas, and connectivity with the Iberian Peninsula, which doesn't always exist with the rest of the EU. So you are a far better platform. In this connection, what you said about India participating in the Ibero-American Summit would be fascinating. If you can elaborate, has there been an invitation? What is the Foreign Office response? Is there a possibility of having a concrete agenda, or are we are observers in the OAS, but I'll admit to you, I was so frustrated in my years in Latin America because when I talked to our embassy in Washington, they would send a first secretary or somebody to just literally observe. We didn't even get a report in Latin America of what the OAS was talking about. And the OAS deliberations may seem bureaucratic, but they can be extremely relevant to an observer of Latin America because each country has its own attitude which is revealed. And I'm sure the Ibero-American Summit for India would be extremely relevant. So can you tell us a little bit?
Yeah, we raised the question with our colleagues in the foreign ministry here in India. We received the idea with great interest. And during the visit of our minister to Delhi in June, the question was raised also with the Minister Jaishankar. And the answer of the Indian side is very, very positive. So we passed the documents in order to know how to proceed, to be part of as observers, as a special status in these summits. And all the responses we had is very, very positive. Even during the visit of the Director General of Instituto Cervantes, Luis García Montero, during the dinner with the Indian side, counterparts, they told us that they have decided to ask for this, to adhere to this initiative. I insist because sometimes you can be frustrated if you put many or great hopes in the ideas. So I think that the problem we have, and especially the problem for Spanish foreign policy, is that our traditional areas, I mean Mediterranean area, Europe, and Latin America, are in trouble in the sense the conflicts in the Mediterranean area are stronger than 20 years ago. The situation in Latin America, the other day I heard a very interesting idea in the sense that Latin America is now the laboratory of many political ideas. It means that it's difficult to deal with a single idea with the whole Latin America, but this is the reality. There are many differences among countries, and it's a laboratory in this sense. And Europe is also in a crisis sometime, and one again, I think it's important to be very clear and very frank when we speak, and we try to find a common ground to act. I think that Europe is in a crisis, was in a crisis. With the Ukraine war, we are reunited. It's true. But the idea is we are reunited because we are behind the position of the US, because we need, in order not to be, I don't know, someone going behind the US, but in our strategic autonomy, we need, and it is important for us to be with the US in this moment, in this war in Europe. So I don't know if it's because of this, or it is because we have, I don't know how to say, to take consciousness about the importance of the European Union. Because before the Ukraine war, European Union was something which was there. For most of the people, was there. And we discover right now that we have an instrument which is very important for peace and stability. So we have to decide all these things. So these traditional areas of the foreign policy of Spain are in crisis, in the sense that there are divisions that 20 years ago didn't exist. And also in Spain, and it's important, we changed our foreign policy during Iraqi war in Iraq. Unexpectedly, we changed absolutely our position. And we are still trying to find where we are. So to be frank. So the situation is complicated in our traditional areas, and also our foreign policy changed in a moment, and we are trying to I don't know if go back or doing something to have one strong idea again to be in the world. And to finish, the answer for this part of the world, for the Indo-Pacific area, we are more and more convinced that our role here is to strengthen trade and investment, not as only as a national interest. It's in order to give some players, for instance India, the possibility of remake the situation without engaging the strategic autonomy. So I'm thinking, for instance, and once again being very clear, if you think in the defense industry and you think that India needs to shift a little bit the balance in the region, Spain is a good country to do this because we don't influence the balance of power. If India needs to perhaps to re-equilibrate and to rebalance the relations with other players, we are a good partners in that sense. So it's not only because of trade, because of commerce, it's also because of our political will to contribute to the stability of the region.
Thank you, Ambassador. Ambassador Jorge Hein, I would like to just not exactly ask you a question, but what would be your views on, when you in your podcast, and I was going through your book also, which is the recent book that we talk about the non-aligned, non-aligned alignment doctrine, active non-aligned. Yeah. So, do you think, this is this? You feel that in your book that this is the Latin America's profound crisis has given urgency, as you have mentioned earlier also, that there's a collapse of world order. So you think that non-alignment movement is going to play a role, not just in terms of Latin America, but taking India along with it?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the question. Well, let me put it this way. The reason this proposal of active non-alignment came to the fore is because we found ourselves, in a way between a rock and a hard place, in a very difficult economic situation because of the recession, in a very difficult situation because of the pandemic, and moreover, pressure from both sides, from Washington and from Beijing, to align ourselves with one or the other. And that is why this notion that takes a page from the best traditions of Indian foreign policy came to the fore. Now, what I'm saying is that obviously the trade and investment and finance, all the things that Ambassador Bojwani elaborated on, is extremely important, what we might call the economic infrastructure of Indo-Latin American relations. But I would argue that at this very perilous moment, the political superstructure is also extremely significant. And it seems to me that if we look at the notion of active non-alignment, we look at the position that India has taken these days on the war in Ukraine, and many other countries have done similar things, South Africa, Indonesia, Brazil, Mexico, and so on. We realize that there is common ground there for us to work not just on buying and selling, but also on a larger conception of world order at a time when we are moving from one international system to another. And that, it seems to me, is a very valuable opportunity. We cannot just talk about buying and selling. We can also talk about common concerns as countries in the global south that are faced with these, existential challenges, things like this new Cold War that is emerging. And that, it seems to me, is a very valuable opportunity that should not be taken lightly. There is a window there that we can work on and we can build on. And it seems to me we should take advantage of it as soon as possible. These windows are not open forever. They open at some point and then they close. And the opportunity must be used. Otherwise, we will waste a tremendous opportunity. Crisis should not be wasted.
Thank you so much. Dr. Roy, I would like to just for finalizing our discussion, I think we are kind of running out of time. My small question to you would be, how do you see the social sector contributing to better relations between our country and this particular region?
Yeah, that's very important, because you see, Latin America, as Ambassador Irao said, that is going through various socioeconomic experiments. It has been a laboratory of great ideas. And many of the countries, including India, has learned many lessons from that. I mean, one such example is what was a very successful agenda of Bolsa Familia. In Mexico, it was known as Oportunidades. Today, they call it Progreso and all that. And you know how India was able to make use of that template and create its own, what is known today as Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Guarantee Scheme and all that. So I think this creates a very important point. But I would also like to say that, you see, what is happening in Latin America in other sectors, particularly the empowerment of the indigenous and the historically disadvantaged sections, is very important, because India also had a similar template. When the constitution was adopted, we decided to provide quota reservations to certain historically disadvantaged sections, not just in jobs and educational institutions, but also in parliament. And there's an important template that I think India has come out with. From Latin America, is what I find very exciting today is the new cosmovision, the new epistemology that is emerging. And I think new ideas, because a great many scholars are working along those lines. At a time of the climate crisis, I think these are very relevant, that, the happiness comes in a community. And so, that kind of a world view from Latin America is something which is equally of interest. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, there are two questions. We'll just quickly take them, and please be brief. Professor Ganguly also. Siddharth, please introduce yourselves, whoever is going to ask a question. Yeah, thank you.
My name is Siddharth, and I'm a Spanish language teacher at one of the top schools in Gurgaon. And I've been teaching Spanish for the last 15 years, and I also teach Hindi to Latin Americans. So I just have three, humble suggestions. Three humble suggestions. These are not questions. I'll be as quick as possible. So one thing is that I would urge the Latin American embassies here in Delhi to engage more with school children, because when I teach to teenagers, they don't know a lot about Latin America. But however, we as teachers, when we teach them about countries and monuments and cultures and festivals, they are very excited to learn about it. And I believe that more engagement from Latin American embassies in schools in Delhi and in fact across India would really help these children learn a lot about Latin America. And these children are at an impressionable age where they can really absorb a lot of things. So that way we can contribute to bridging cultures between the two regions. The second suggestion that I would like to give is that maybe there are a lot of Indians like me who are interested in literary translation. And I recently, last year, translated Ecuadorian author Abdon Obidia, his collection of short stories from Spanish to Hindi. The reason why I'm stating this is that after I translated and got published, a lot of Hindi readers with no Spanish background, but Hindi readers, academics in universities and general readers were interested in knowing about these stories, and who were generally not very aware of Latin America, wanted to buy the book and read. So if there can be more funding provided to aspiring translators in India who would like to translate work from Spanish to Hindi or even other regional languages, I think it will go a long way in contributing. The third thing is that, as Ambassador Bhojwani pointed out, that there's a lot of interest for Bollywood in Latin America, and I have personally experienced this, that on my Instagram account, I have a lot of Latin American girls who are fascinated by Bollywood as Ambassador Bhojwani said, and they're fascinated by Indians' TV serials and films. So what I feel is that if the Latin American ambassadors can convey this message to universities in Latin America, that probably they can start centers of Hindi. I'm sure there might be some universities which might be teaching Hindi, but I believe that if more concerted efforts can be made to teach Hindi, there are actually quite a few Latin American takers for this, from my personal experience of teaching Hindi to a few of them. So these are some of my humble suggestions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Siddharth. Professor Ganguly? Yes, and then, or should we take you last, sir? Okay. We have two girls. We have two girls, yes. Three. Quickly, please. Yeah. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Shreya Ganguly. I'm from Lady Shriram College. I had a question with something that came up at the panel. There was an idea which was discussed of not treating Latin America as a conglomerate, of recognizing the regional influences that Latin America has. My question is that in doing so, can it become polarizing in nature? And if so, how do we diplomatically approach it so as to not hierarchize one region over the other within Latin America?
Ambassador Bhojwani, would you like to
I think
answer?
Jorge would be better placed to answer this. Jorge?
Well, thank you. Well, I will say that there are two issues here that are important to keep in mind. Yes, Latin America is a very diverse region, but at the same time, there is a common identity. There are those who deny the very existence of Latin America and say it's just a bunch of countries that are close to each other geographically. Well, that is not the case. There is a strong Latin American identity which expresses itself in a variety of ways. So what you need, I would say, responding directly to your point, you need what might I say is a variable geometry approach. Keep in mind, there is this very potent entity that is Latin America, and at the same time, various countries have their own preferences and particularities. And if you do that, you will be on the right track. Things like the OAS, like the Inter-American Development Bank, like CELAC, provide useful entries into this regional dimension, while the embassies in each of the countries provide the necessary bilateral entry. Thank you.
Thank you.
If I may just add, the one thing about India is that, my experience, we are ideologically agnostic. We deal with each country as it is. We do not approach it from the lens of whether it's a liberal democracy or a dictatorship or whatever. I mean, of course, there are certain differences, there are nuances in our approach, but we treat each country as a sovereign partner. And this is important. I could go into it, but there's not much time.
Yeah, thank you. There was another question.
Good evening, sir and ma'am. I'm Akshita Jain from Gargi College. So, sir, as today we discussed about the fact that a lot needs to get established between both the countries, both Latin America and India. So I want to ask that the cultural know-how of Latin America in India and vice versa is very less and limited. And it is not in the case of US or Europe because their culture has proliferated into the world. So what can be practically done and worked on this situation?
Yeah, Dr. Rai, would you like to answer this question?
Yeah, that's a very valid point, but then, this is something which is not easy to handle because, a country like the United States had that advantages over decades to kind of, become a cultural bearer and all that. But then that has to change, and that is changing. Actually, if you see that even the Indian music in South America or Latin American music, I think I go to the gym and every day you have all those hit songs in Spanish and from Latin America and all that. So that I think will take time, and yes, that hegemony is not easy to counter. But then things, we have to be hopeful, and this is all.
Yeah, thank you. There's one last question from that girl. Yeah, and then Professor Ganguly would be saying a few points, I think. And after that, please, no more questions. And Ayushi, you would be giving the vote of thanks, I'm sure. Or Ayushi or Oscar, who? Yes.
Greetings, dignitaries. My name is Draupadi Mahalakshmi, and I'm from Lady Shriram College. So my question is regarding Madam Noorin was also mentioning about the importance of Spanish language that has helped many traders and businessmen and everyone. And also Professor Siddharth, I guess, was also mentioning about the importance of language Hindi. So apart from the realm of language, we have the phases of culture, the heritage, traditions, and everything. So, as Ma'am Akshita was also mentioning about, to an extent, we have not explored the culture and heritage between the two regions. So, what can we do in the future so as to kind of explore and collaboratively bring into the consensus in such a way that we are able to explore the culture traditions of the other regions, and also collaboratively do something in such a way that the youth is also able to understand about the culture of the nation and also move in the way forward?
Yeah, thank you. Actually, it's a very valid suggestion because, see, if you look at it, we do not just teach the language part or the literature part. We do talk about the culture of each and different countries in our classroom. So when we do that, we are actually taking our students closer to them. We talk about, all of you have seen Zindagi Na Milegi Dobara. You all know about Tomatina festival. So these are kind of small steps that we have taken, or in our classrooms. I have shown just recently, I showed a documentary on Calakmul or Machu Picchu. So these are things that we need to do, so because if you do not, just knowing the language is also not enough. You have to know how do they behave, what do they eat. So that is all taught in the Indian classrooms. All of us on our part, we make that effort, and the students have more, they do have more curiosity. They want to learn. And Instituto Cervantes has helped us a lot in this. Since the setting up of the institute, we have had so many students coming over here, learning about not just Spain, but all Latin American countries. Yeah. I'm going to go to Professor Ganguly.
If I may just add a comment out here. There are universities here like JNU which do not just language, but area studies. What is vital is for our universities to get their act together and do area studies, which means you don't just study a language and a little bit of the culture and the, whatever, but you actually study what that country is all about. Area studies, if you remember, will be the way forward in Latin America.
Yeah, we do politics, we do diplomacy of Latin American countries in JNU as well as in Jamia also with their new PhD programs. We have taken students who have come up with varied subjects, like you have a person from geography also working on Latin America, from international studies also working. So there are lots of efforts made. So Professor Ganguly, please.
Well, thank you so much. It has been really a learning experience from the exposition made by the four presenters and also through the question answer session. I have only, one curiosity, whether any concrete program has been framed at the governmental level, at the private level, to exchange journalists between these two regions, between India and Latin America. Why am I talking? I've taught for more than 45 years. One of the major problems is the lack of awareness, or consciousness about the realities of these two regions. Indians don't know Latin America. Latin Americans really don't know about India properly. It was only, I was reading a thesis presented by, a PhD thesis presented by a Chilean lady, 2 years ago, in which she is trying to fathom the kind of reception the Chileans had towards India, or for India. And from the beginning to the end, she finds, from concrete references, she finds that it is still, in most of the people, not in the elite, educated people. But in most of the people's mind, still they have the impression of an India of, fakirs, of India of Maharajas, India of the serpent and the cows running. Now this is, seconded by the fact that, I brought out a compiled book on Cesar Vallejo, this was in 2011. It was very well received. It was a trilingual, presentation. And this book had, it was presented to the journalist in Peru and in Latin America. Some of the comments that came out, from the reviewers is that everyone was wondering, how can somebody do a work on Cesar Vallejo in India? Is that possible? Is it the reviewer, one reviewer from Peru was wondering whether, this gentleman called Professor Ganguly has employed a series of translators to understand the meaning of the poems and the plays and the and the essays and the comments that he had made from Europe for Peru, and sent to various organizations. And so they were trying to wonder whether in a country like India, could we have a kind of background to produce such a book, and such a beautiful book. He was praising the whole book, throughout his 3 pages. He was praising, but he was wondering, how can this come out from India? We have to.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor Ganguly.
So therefore, is there a concrete? My question is there a concrete? Has there been any concrete thought about the exchange of journalists? We know China has developed, because China thought about opening schools and colleges, courses in Spanish 20 years ago. And therefore, they were able to train people in their own land to go and take hold of
Professor Ganguly, you're absolutely right. I couldn't agree more, and no one here would disagree with you. The only thing is, because of a lack of time, and thanks to our hosts, that we've gone over it. But the thing is, you are absolutely right. There is a chasm, not a gap. It's a chasm as far as media is concerned. We have no media presence, which is concerted. Our major channels, our major media outlets out here, the major print media are absent in Latin America, vice versa. So we go through the mediation of, say, EFE and other agencies, Reuters and so on and so forth. These reports that we get are obviously from a point of view of a different culture, whether it's the US, whether it's UK, or whether it's Europe. It is true. And for that reason, a work like yours has perhaps come as a shock to people that, look, is there this kind of sort of awareness that exists in India and so on and so forth. We have to do something about it. But it's precisely, what you're asking is precisely the effort that you have been making, and other universities here need to make even more. We need to redouble our efforts, and precisely why we are here in the Instituto Cervantes with the Spanish ambassador, and hopefully through this mediation, we will not just be dealing with Latin America and understanding it and vice versa through Europe or someone else. Because as the Spanish ambassador said, he's not doing it as a nation or as a state. He's doing it in order to have more collaboration directly between Latin America and India. That's what we need. Yeah, there will be. There have been. Dr. Ganguly, Professor Ganguly, there have been. Let me tell you, PTI, there was a proposal made 15 years ago to base a correspondent there. It just wasn't found worthwhile. Because let's face facts, the media is in private hands. The Confucian institutes are financed and positioned by the Chinese government. Our government doesn't do that. As I mentioned to you in my talk, we've got 5 or 6 institutions organized to cater to the diaspora mainly. Now, this is unfortunately a policy flaw. We have to go beyond, but perhaps it takes resources and it takes more attention. You're absolutely right for pointing it out, but this is the reality. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. It has been a really wonderful discussion. I think we all could have continued further, but Ms. Ayushi Kapoor, now she's going to give the vote of thanks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Noreen Khan, for the invitation. On behalf of European Union National Institutes for Culture Delhi Cluster, I would like to thank His Excellency Mr. Jose Maria Ridao, Mr. Jorge Haini for joining us from Boston, Mr. Deepak Bhojwani, Dr. Ash Narayan for a wonderful session, and thank you, Dr. Noreen Khan, for being a wonderful moderator to this conversation, and I hope it was an enlightening session for everyone. Along with that, I would like to thank the Ambassador of Costa Rica, Diplomat Ms. Sofia from Costa Rica Embassy, and Ms. Bianca Weiss joining us from Dominican Republic, and Professor Sandra Joseph from Jesus and Mary College, whom we'd be collaborating for the next event that's happening in Jesus and Mary College. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today, and I hope you all have a wonderful evening ahead. Take care.